You know what's one of my earliest memories I can conjure up from the depths of my brain archives? It's when you drop down the elevator, start lighting up a bunch of Imperials, and finally steal the Death Star plans. Of course, I'm referring to the cult classic shooter, Star Wars Dark Forces. It was the first installment in the Jedi Knight series, which spanned from 1995 to 2003. 8 years of stormtrooper blasting, lightsaber slashing fun. And Kyle's really flip-floppy evolution.
I can't! No!
It saw the release of Dark Forces, Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight Mysteries of the Sith, Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcasts, and finally Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. Yeah. You can probably tell that they didn't think about the naming scheme. In any case, I think it's safe to say that I put in the most time into the Jedi Knight series as a kid. I mean, it's Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Obviously, I was going to love an action-based shooter set in Star Wars. But fast forward to today and it got me thinking. You know, I haven't played these games in decades, despite putting a ton of time into them as a kid. I kinda wonder how they hold up nowadays. And hey, thanks to GOG, I can play them on a modern PC and hopefully critique them. Besides seeing how they hold up, I want to see if the games have any interesting mechanics, ideas, themes, stories, or characters. Since I played them at such a young age, I never really was able to actually get good at these games. In fact, I probably only beat the games with cheat codes growing up and my dad around to help. I mean, I was like 4 to 8 years old when these games came out. I'll be going through the games chronologically, including the novelizations, and then assessing the series in its entirety, seeing the trends, where some games did something better than the others, and maybe pick out which is my favorite of the 5. That's my goal. Basically revisiting and completing the Jedi Knight series with modern lenses. So let's start with Star Wars Dark Forces. Probably the first game I ever played, or at least I can remember. Who knows, maybe Marble Madness was the first game I played. Now with Dark Forces, the mere mention makes me feel all nostalgic and sentimental to the game. Even though I remember the first few hours of the game, stealing the Death Star plans, the massacre at the Rebel base, and the notorious sewer level in broad strokes, I don't remember the rest of the game, the other 11 missions specifically. Yeah, I remember the planets, the mood and the color palettes, but that's it. I don't remember how exactly they played. And yeah, I never beat the game fair and square. So I'm going to rectify that by playing Star Wars Dark Forces again and seeing how it holds up. What works for me and what doesn't. 2 decades later. Released in 1995, Dark Forces follows Kyle Katarn, former Imperial officer now mercenary for the Rebellion. He's hired to find and stop the Dark Troopers, super soldiers who manage to completely decimate a Rebel base in seconds. You'll be heading over to a dozen different planets and ships, each with their own unique look and feel. Fighting Imperials, gangsters, and the local wildlife, including 2 bosses, Boba Fett and General Maul, the mastermind behind the Dark Troopers. Besides mowing down your enemies, there's platforming, exploration, and actual mission objectives.
Navicard inserted and decoding.
The mission objectives being considered a novel idea at the time, since most shooters would just have you go from point A to point B, and then next mission. Dark Forces on the other hand had you do things you'd kinda see in films. So you'll be capturing plans, finding evidence in wanted criminals, rescue prisoners, blow up factories, break out and escape from a ship, and finally put an end to the Dark Trooper project. A lot of people will probably think the game looks very similar to Doom, and yeah, Dark Forces was considered a Doom clone back then, even though production started while Doom was being developed. And the Dark Forces team did include some unique features not seen in those id Software games. The expansive environments, the natural lighting which makes use of your flashlight and blaster fire in the dark, and the ability to tilt your head up and down, gave Dark Forces its own quirks and identity beyond its Star Wars iconography. Though regarding the head tilting, the actual process is unintuitive. You need to press the page up and page down keys to look up and down. It comes off as if Kyle's neck muscles are being operated like machinery. Fortunately for me, I used the Dark Forces Plus mod, which I'll link below, a simple mod that lets you mouse look and use modern controls like WSD. And that's a game in broad strokes and what they aim to do. Of course, the question is how well it executes them. Obviously, it's all about perspective, and personally, having grown up on modern gaming sensibilities more, they won't line up one-to-one with someone from the 90s. Though something that's never changed, even back in 1995, live up to the considerable expectations of millions of finicky Star Wars fans. Oh, how Star Wars fans haven't changed. But I digressed. Let's start with the things I enjoyed. You know what's a universal constant? It's seeing stormtroopers get slapped around in everything Star Wars. Whether they're blasted, lightsabered, exploded, or blown away.
Hey!
It never gets boring seeing space Nazis go flying. And Dark Forces does a great job of making the Faceless Legion just a blast to, well, blast. And that goes for the other enemies too. I think much of it is thanks to the death animations. Unlike Doom, Dark Forces lacks gore, but it does still have some awfully satisfying death animations. Kill feel, to me, is a small but still important aspect in shooters. Seeing enemies react dramatically and strongly will always trump ragdoll animations, where they just flop to the ground and look weightless. I think my favorite death animations are the Gamorrean guards. How they fall over and drop their battle axes. The individual frames are just, so good. Aside from the menagerie of grunts, the Dark Forces mini-bosses are intimidating, iconic mini-bosses and muscle. There's a Phase 1 Dark Troopers that try to get close and personal, and they can deflect your munitions with their shields. Sometimes. The Phase 2 Dark Troopers are armed with plasma cannons and rockets. They're basically Terminators. Plus they soak up a ton of damage. And there's the Phase 3 Dark Trooper, which is just General Malk's personal battlesuit. Though because I corner shot him and killed him so quick, I don't really know how deadly the Phase 3 actually is. It's a bit upsetting that they never reintroduced the Dark Troopers into the Jedi Knight games. The very concept of Super Soldier Stormtroopers sounds perfect for games. I guess Jedi Outcast introduced Force-sensitive Shadow Troopers, and Rogue One with the Death Troopers. Oh, related to the Dark Troopers, I really like the second mission's mood. How you see the aftermath of the Dark Troopers' attack on the Rebel base. The corpses and destruction just leaves a haunting mood. As for the music, it's exceptional. Not only are there lo-fi John Williams tracks, but major kudos to the composer who put out all new original music for the game. Also, kudos to this YouTube channel that remastered the entire score in an orchestral format. And yes, it's a shame that the other 4 Jedi Knight games would just recycle the same old John Williams scores from the films, not changing the music or anything. As for the story, it's nothing really noteworthy. It's simple and straightforward, but I do appreciate the effort put into the story. Especially since it was the 90s and I assume most shooters didn't put in the time and effort into the story, cutscenes, and voice dialogue. Speaking of presentation, I think visually, I quite like the look of the game. Yes, it's not hyper detailed or realistic, but I'm a sucker for old 90s aesthetics, even if I didn't play many of them. And I'm big on stylized graphics, so I just find the old 90s 2.5D look just charming. And hey, they throw in original characters, with the main character being Kyle Katarn, and the main antagonist is an original character. He reminds me of Director Krennic from Rogue One. Both being on the older side, they were also part of a secret weapons program. And like Rogue One, both villains decide to personally face the protagonist. Okay, there's established characters in there that don't make much sense, like Jabba capturing you because he's iconic. I kinda feel like they could've made original Hutt characters like in the expanded universe, and Mysteries of the Sith later actually did do that. Oh, okay, they probably just added him in for FMV reasons, like the team reusing Akbar footage during the Dark Trooper attack. But otherwise, the fan service is pretty minimal and unobtrusive. Vader's just there for Mark to give his sales pitch to, and just give the scenes that Vader touch.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
And yes, like pretty much every Star Wars game, it nails the look, sound, and feel of Star Wars. But having said all that, despite my praises, there's two glaring issues that sadly undermine what could have been a great shooter instead of what I consider a fine but deeply flawed game. As I've said before, I am not great at shooters. Sure, I'll get the occasional MVP highlights here and there.
4 last operator standing.
But no, I'm no shooter expert. Especially when it comes to the 90s shooters, 2.5D or early 3D. And I think my dad and I only beat the game thanks to cheats. So yeah, just putting it out there that I'm not great at these games and I want to beat the game fair and square this time. With that out of the way, the game's a decent challenge for the first half of the game. The much maligned, notoriously bad Stormtrooper aim is subverted here actually, with them having a good chance of hitting you. And I never found myself struggling to find health and shields for much of the game. But I think where the game starts becoming really punishing is when you reach the second half of the game. Some of it has to do with the enemy types when they toss in these non-Imperial enemies, like these grants that hurl grenades at you left and right. But worse are the Trandoshans. They have a concussion rifle that hits you as soon as they press the trigger, and the ensuing blast knocks off a big chunk of your health. Unless you kill them first, of course. The ceiling turrets are also rather punishing. Not only do they deal a lot of hurt on you, but I also feel sorry for all those people who aren't used to the game's default head tilting controls.
Gotta pan up every time. Just shoot the fucking turret!
Speaking of losing lives, the game uses a live system, a carryover from Wolfenstein 3D rather than Doom. Now, having lives can make the game feel a bit more tense and stressful, but I'll be honest, I personally prefer save scumming and checkpoints, because the alternative is you repeating 20 to 30 minutes if not more of gameplay if you lose all your lives. I only started to die a handful of times towards the end of the game, but it's still nevertheless soul-sucking to come so close to finishing the level, but then messing up that one jump and having to spend another 30 minutes going through the same enemies and navigating through the entire level again. But you know what killed me the most in this game? These mines are the masters of death in this game. These mines trigger several feet away. They also take a sizable chunk of your health. And the designers sometimes place them around corners or in the dark, which is just downright unfair. It's just trial and error, and it heightens the chance of redoing the entire level if you run out of lives. You can only trigger them safely by throwing grenades, which isn't convenient when your throwing arm is one of the worst I've seen. Yet, none of that compares to the final level, which is just utterly unforgiving. I have never sweated from my palms as much as from this single level. The first recurring theme of this final mission is the cheap enemy placement, where as soon as you walk around a corner or open a door, you meet stormtroopers that just get a free hit on you. It's also quite irritating when you're on elevators, not knowing where the door is going to open, and then you're shot at from behind or from the side. The second theme of this final mission seems to be that it's awfully stingy with health. For long stretches of the final level, I'd have a quarter of my life left, and I just couldn't find any health kits or shield packs. I was on the edge of my seat for 15 minutes, because just a couple lucky hits more, and I would have had to restart this entire level from the beginning. And this level goes on for 40 minutes. You can't imagine how stressed out I was when I went up against 4 Dark Troopers and the final boss. No extra lives, wounded, and no room for failure.
I'm glad my opponent is so worthy.
And yet, despite the difficulty spikes in the second half, there was something else that undermined my overall enjoyment of the entire game. If being bad at old school shooters wasn't enough, did you know I'm terrible at map navigations too? I easily get lost in games like Souls, and it does irk me when I feel like I'm not making any progress or making good use of my time. I'm aware there's players who dislike hand-holding or in-game hints.
The game's helpful, hand-holding quest information was kind of spoiling the experience.
And instead prefer to explore the environments themselves, but yeah, just putting it out there. Now with Dark Forces, I know everyone has talked to death about the sewer level, how it has 5 or more sewer tunnels, diverging routes, and switches you need to activate while using your flashlights or night vision goggles, but because there's limited batteries in this game, if you run out because you don't know where to go,
Good luck. You're gonna need it.
just know you're not the only one in the sewers. But besides the infamous sewer level, I think much of the game is rife with these confusing labyrinthian level designs. Now, what do I mean by level design? Besides designing the environments, level design includes item placement, enemy placement, puzzles, and other elements. I covered how the later missions already have some pretty cheap enemy encounters and get stingy with health, but in this section I'm going to focus on the large sprawling map layout and puzzles. Now, the level design is technically impressive. Each level has different layers and floors and are just meticulously complex and interconnected. But the lack of direction and just overly convoluted map designs really was my least favorite aspect of the game. I couldn't help but just feel this sense of deflation as soon as the gunfight was over, because I would be wandering around for minutes trying to figure out where I'm supposed to go. The in-game map didn't really help me either. It's just a bunch of green outlines, and there's multiple layers and floors in this game too that compound the inadequate in-game map. I found that one of the best ways to know you're probably making progress is when you stumble upon new enemies. A prime example of the game's confusing level design is the detention facility level, where towards the end, you're supposed to know that you need to have the elevator go down without you, so you can go behind the elevator, open this tiny door, drop down, open another tiny door, and jump across. And I have no idea how you're supposed to know this. This level already has 4 different massive sprawling floors, so I found myself backtracking through all of them before I just gave up and went on my phone to find a walkthrough. Something that doesn't help too is that a lot of the times, you have no idea what the switches or passwords exactly do. In fact, the results of your actions almost always occur some or more rooms away. Audio hints would have been nice to help guide players. Like here on Jabba's cruise ship, I'm supposed to find my gear, but after punching dragons and killing a bunch of guards, I entered this room and just noticed a bunch of hanging chains. I thought that was just a piece of scenery, but after several minutes of wandering around and not knowing where to go, I randomly just jumped up and picked up my stolen gear. A simple line like, "Hey, that's my gear," would have been nice, you know? There's some complicated puzzles like this one on the Imperial City where you had to figure out which door combinations to open or close, so you can enter the data archives. After several minutes of just messing around and not making any progress, I had to pull out my Dark Forces walkthrough book to see what's the correct combination. And I could go on about the level design, how every level has its own confusing and dizzying environments that makes it unclear what you're supposed to do, how it exactly connects to the main objective, the lack of hints or directions, and more. But the video would probably go on way too long. I understand. There were technical limitations and the team was largely inexperienced, including the level designers. But this is just my honest opinion. I think it's something that really hasn't aged well, and honestly, I would have preferred something more straightforward, even if it meant a much shorter game like Doom, which was 46 hours, compared to Dark Forces, which was 9 to 11 hours long and less linear. Regardless, while the difficulty spikes were rather punishing, it was the labyrinthian, convoluted level design that mainly and unfortunately soured my experience with the game. In spite of my issues, what did others think about the game? The general reception for the game surprised me somewhat. I thought people back in the 90s would have been far more receptive to the game, but it seems like the reviews were generally fine. Some outlets giving it high praise while others were more on the warmer side, leaning towards it being a decent but flawed game. People appreciated the ability to look up and down, the production values, and how well it captured Star Warsiness. One reviewer even was a fan of the level design. The scenery is flat out fantastic. There are so many different levels of height in this game that your surroundings are nothing less than vast. The more critical reviews criticized the lack of multiplayer, given that Doom and Doom 2 had it. GameSpot's reviewer also took issue with the game on its length, that its flaw was that it was tragically short-lengthed. I would say 11 hours is a pretty good length. Now, something I can get behind are the criticisms about the convoluted maps and difficulty. Next Generation magazine called all 14 levels exceptionally difficult. PC Gamer put out a piece a few years ago, praising the game overall but admitting the game was obtuse and had difficult puzzle sequences. And the computer core puzzle in Mission 11? F*** that hexagonal nightmare. But putting aside my gripes with the difficulty and level design, I had a good bit of fun with the game. Besides it always being satisfying to mow down a ton of enemies in Star Wars, I was happy to revisit and finally beat the game on my own. And you know, it was pretty satisfying. You whoop General Mock's ass, take out this one lone officer standing over the shuttle, which is a funny note to end the game on since they're the weakest enemy type in the game. And the cinematic of watching Kylo escape while Vader watches the station fall apart and you getting your reward before flying off onward to another adventure is a great way to end the game, even if the final mission felt unfairly stacked against you. And I'm happy to see that while it doesn't seem to be as fondly remembered nowadays apart from Star Wars fans, the sales and reception back then were strong enough to warrant a sequel, which promised to give the fans what they wanted: multiplayer and, of course, lightsabers. So in conclusion, if you can look past some of the punishing difficulty spikes and confusing level design, you'll probably enjoy the game a lot. For me, it was a decent shooter with charming elements like the music and graphics. When the game doesn't slow down to a crawl because of the confusing levels, the game's just a blast. And obviously the Star Wars iconography always puts a smile on my face. The last point I want to end on is the incredible fan community that has put out a great deal of mods and custom missions over the years. These fan-made missions even have some impressive fan-made cutscenes that cross over with other established characters. Unfortunately, I couldn't try them out myself as much as I wanted to. It seems like there's some 64-bit compatibility issues on my end. Maybe you'll get them to work, but if not, you could always just watch them on YouTube at least. It's pretty mind-blowing to see the amount of work and dedication put into these mods. In any case, despite being unable to play more Dark Forces content, there is Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight coming up, and whether or not it improves upon the original, I hope you'll be there to see it.